Hey, Lauren, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing real well. Thanks for joining me on the call. You know, normally when I'm on video, I don't like to wear headphones, don't like to have them showing up. But I thought today we're going to be talking about headphones. So here we are.
I know. And it makes me feel so safe and secure. I love these things. This is my happy place.
Very nice. Well, as a voice actor yourself, I met you first at a workshop, which was fantastic, and then came to find out afterwards that you work for Wirecutter and, among other things, review headphones. I've described you to other people as someone who will forget more about headphones than I will ever know.
Well, thank you. I have tested a lot of headphones over the years. Somewhere along the line, I became kind of like one of the most prolific headphone reviewers in the English language. So on average, I test about 200 headphones a year.
Wow.
And, you know, since I've been at Wirecutter, I think just at Wirecutter, so not even counting when I worked for other magazines and publications before that, about 1,200 now.
Wow.
So, and that's actually on my head, not just like reading about and researching. So, yeah, I do know a lot about headphones.
Well, yeah, that is so impressive. And I love talking to you about voice acting, and I love talking to you about headphones. Let's take those things and put them together and talk about headphones for voice acting. What do you say?
It sounds awesome. It's a Venn diagram I'm into.
Nice. So what are you wearing today?
These are the old standbys. Everybody's probably seen these, the Sony 7506. They're the workhorses of pretty much everything in audio and TV. I mean, if you watch any like reality show when like the sound guy accidentally goes into frame or something, they're usually wearing these.
Yeah.
And it's for good reason. I mean,
Right.
They are relatively neutral sounding perceptually. We could get into how they're tuned specifically, but they're inexpensive and they sound way better than they have any business sounding. They usually cost around $80. They're reliable. The ear pads are replaceable. So like this pair I have, it's probably about 8 years old now.
Wow, impressive.
I've replaced the ear pads once, but they're in great shape. And like, you know, I'm careful, but I'm not insane about these things. Like I'm not overly precious. And like I've seen people run over the cables with their desk chairs and other stuff. And so they're reliable and you can use them in, you know, both monitoring and for, you know, if you need to do some quick like editing stuff, and they're fantastic for that.
So you obviously like them for Zoom calls. Do you use them when you're recording at home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are one of my primary booth headphones, mainly because they don't have a lot of sound bleed. And the reasons that I said before, that they're kind of inexpensive, I can leave them, you know, in my booth and not have to worry about them too much. And they aren't my expensive sit down and listen and luxuriate headphones, which I'm very privileged to have access to because of my job. So yeah, and these were kind of one of the first purchases that I made when I was kind of building my own little, you know, home booth setup. And they've lasted me really well ever since. I mean, you figure $80 over 8 years, not a bad investment.
Yeah, that is pretty good. Do you have other headphones that you personally like to wear when you're recording voiceover?
I do. I recently got into, and in fact, I have them. I can pick them up.
Yeah, visual aids. Here we go.
So these guys have become like the darling of the pro audio industry. These are the AKG K371s. The reason that they are really becoming popular is that they have the closest measurement to the Harmon Curve that has been sort of recorded in a affordable / consumer level headphone. And do we want to talk about what the Harmon Curve is?
Yeah, let's let everybody know, because really it's an idealized, this is what we think headphones should sound like curve, right?
Yes. So essentially, there's been some research done, and the reason it's called Harmon is it was done at Harmon AKG, and there's a fella named Sean Olive who is an audio researcher and headphone developer, and essentially, when he was studying all of this and did double-blind testing and stuff, he found that people found that the most natural sound in headphones had a certain kind of frequency curve. So there's a little bit of a boost in the lows and a little bit of boost in the highs. I could get more specific, but essentially that's the general idea, is that there's a little extra on the low and the highs, and that sounds perceptually neutral. So before, everyone looked for something when you measured it that went as flat as possible. Every single frequency range was equally represented all the way across. But they found that when you listen to something, that's not necessarily when it's in a closed environment in your ears, how your brain receives that information. So the Harmon Curve, it kind of tricks your brain into making things sound similar to what you would hear in open air, so coming out of a speaker, for example. So that's what we talk about when we say perceptually neutral. It doesn't measure that way, but it sounds that way. And these guys are the closest that have ever been measured so far. And they're a lot more affordable than a lot of like high-end audio headphones. So these guys run around like $120 to $150, depending on what time of the year it is and sales and stuff. And they just sound really great. So people have kind of been leaning towards these recently. These only came out in 2019, ever since they came out. They're really comfortable. They have a nice squishy foam, adjustable, in terms of they fold up nicely. They don't have too much clamping force, so they're not going to give you a headache. The only thing I would say about them is that I haven't had them for a really long time, so I can't speak to how long they're going to last over time. They feel well built, but these guys have been out since the 90s, so I can talk about the longevity of the 7506. These I haven't had access to as long. But for people who are looking for that in-between of headphones that maybe you can do a little mixing with, and are willing to spend a little bit more, like these are around $80, these are almost double that. These are another really great option.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, one of the reason that I have these Shue 840s was they had been recommended to me as being neutral. Now, what you define as neutral, of course, depends a lot on your experience and what you hear, but I always felt like the 7506s had a little bit of hype to them. I fatigued in them kind of quickly, and I didn't so much in these. But of course, you don't know, and a lot of places that sell headphones are really weird about it. For hygienic purposes, you don't want to be wearing headphones that someone else was necessarily sweating in or whatever. And so I found that, the opportunity to demo headphones. So I had to go a lot on reviews, and someone that I trusted said, hey, these things are pretty neutral. And I wouldn't say that is highly accurate. I would say they seem more neutral to me than a lot of other headphones that I've tried, but I don't have nearly the experience you do. The thing that I like about the Shue 840s, relatively low in price. I think they're running about $150 right now. And they are closed back, and they do a really good job of keeping the sound in so it doesn't get on my microphone. And they do a really good job of keeping the sound out. They're not noise canceling, but just the physics of it, I can be recording in a fairly noisy environment, and I can tell the difference between what the mic is getting and what I'm getting. So as an audio professional, I don't know if this is a good set of headphones necessarily for a voice actor. I think the neutral part might be helpful, but maybe we should start getting into different things, because we could talk a lot about headphones sort of generally, but let's dive into what a voice actor needs with headphones. And what do you think that is?
Well, a couple things. One you just touched upon is good isolation. So one of the big things is that you don't want bleed through. So there are headphones that are open backed. There are headphones that don't seal completely. And when I say don't seal completely, it also comes down to a little bit fit on your head. I have a smaller noggin. So headphones that have a longer type of ear cup or really large ear cups can create a gap, and that sound will leak out. So that's something you have to think about, when you get them, is kind of make sure that you have them positioned properly on your head. But you want something that's going to isolate some of the sound. So when you talk about the physics of basically blocking sound waves both in and out, you want something that is going to have a decent representation of the sound that you are recording. And I do think there is something to be said about, for voiceover, having a relatively decent sense of what your like a neutral sound is. The only reason I say that is because you might be tempted to fuss around with, maybe your proximity or something to do with your gain. If your headphones are more bassy, you might think, oh wow, I'm picking up a lot of room noise in here, and you might be messing around with your gain to get rid of it when actually your headphones are just overemphasizing it. Or the other side, if you have something that's more high frequency heavy and you're losing the low end, you might be picking up room noise that you don't even know about. So it's those types of situations where it's important to get something that's, and most headphones will cover those bases, but I'm saying I wouldn't go for anything that's labeled as extra bass. I wouldn't go for something that's like an $8, I got it at the CVS down the street. That's the reason I'm bringing those things up, is just that you want to make sure that you're at least able to hear kind of what's happening when you're recording. And then the other thing is, for me, it's a cable that has a decent length. If you only have the standard earbud length, so we're talking like, you know, something that comes with like a pair of these guys, you're going to be really chained to whatever it is that you're recording with, and you don't want to be hampered, especially if you're doing something that has to do with animation and you need to have some physical movement to your sound. You want to make sure you have a long enough cable. You can, in a pinch, I've absolutely had to use earbuds before when I'm traveling or at a hotel or something. But that said, you know, those are the main things that I think you want to look for. So neutral sound, decent fit, and isolation with a decent length cable.
Yeah, now personally, one of the things I like about these and that came on, I don't know how long this started happening. I've noticed it about 10 or 15 years ago. They started making detachable cables. Mm-hmm. Do your 7506s, they don't detach, do they? These
don't detach. It's one of the only downsides. In fact, if you read the article that I had written about these guys, like the first time around, that was one of my flaws, but not deal breakers, was that it doesn't have a detachable cable.
Right.
The 371s does. And it's nice because it does give you the option to replace if you need to repair it, if something does happen. That said, it's not super detachable, so it's not like if you snag on it, it's going to come loose on you. I think for any of these, most of them have a locking mechanism that kind of like you push a button in or you turn and pull.
Yeah, I have found, you know, the two things that sort of annoy me about headphones that I've had in the past are needing to replace the pads, but that's just going to happen if you have something comfortable, and breaking the cable and feeling like I had to replace the whole thing, or get in there and solder some really small components. And not all of them are serviceable. You know, they don't make them easy to get in and repair. And by the time you put the labor into it, depending on how much you think you're worth per hour, it might be better to replace them if they're inexpensive.
Yeah.
So I do like the detachable cable. And in the case of some of the higher end Shure headphones, they give you two cables. They give you a short one and a long one. Mm-hmm. So I think is also a nice feature.
Yes.
In some of the products that I've seen.
A lot of companies that are designed, the headphones that are designed for pro, like their pro lines, will usually come with a coiled and a straight flat cable. So you get those two. The only thing I will say as a caveat to the detachable cable thing is that if you are frequently plugging and unplugging, that is a failure point. So I've heard that argument of 6 of one, half dozen of another when I've brought this up, the full permanently attached. It's more, you can't repair it as often. But also, too, just like, you know, sometimes the headphone jack on your laptop will fail because you're in and out all the time. If you're constantly plugging and unplugging, keep that in mind. It is a place that could break, especially if it's pin-based in there. And if you're also coiling them up, make sure that you don't leave it attached when you put them in the bag, because if you do, that's another place that could snap and you could have a failure point there. So just a little caveat for that.
Well, and that's good, too, because we're not just talking about buying headphones. We're talking about using them and getting the most use we can before we have to replace them with something else. And so knowing how to not pinch the cable at a tight spot, it's on this side, Randy. Knowing how to not pinch that cable means you're going to get longer wear out of the headphones. And assuming you still like them, you get to keep using them until you break them. So that's good to point out.
Yeah.
One of the things I found really interesting in this particular time when we are in quarantine from COVID-19 is that a lot of us are on Zoom calls. I don't think before quarantine I knew what Zoom even was, and now my life kind of revolves around it. That's very true for voice actors, wouldn't you say?
I think possibly. You know, it's interesting. For me personally, I do a decent amount of remote recording from home. So I've done stuff via Skype, Zoom, Uber conference, and things like that, being directed from home. So I'm a little more accustomed to it, but that also might just be because I was already comfortable with that technology, and my agents knew that and would just say like, "Oh, she's fine, she can do it," and it never really was an issue. But I will say, in general, I think a lot of people are learning how to deal with this and all of the new, not just Zoom, but also recording yourself from a remote location using things like Source Connect and figuring out like how to handle all of this stuff, phone patching from home. I think that used to be that most people, unless you were like, had your own booth set up by someone, you kind of went into all the studios, and now it's kind of shifting. And I'm wondering what's going to change, like if we're going to do more of this kind of stuff now that people are getting more adept at it.
Yeah, well, and something else that an actor friend of mine brought up that I hadn't really thought about, we were talking about the DT-770s, which are some really nice headphones. A lot of audio professionals like them. I have friends who like them. And this actor was saying she had a pair, but I noticed she wasn't wearing them. And I said, well, where are your Bear Dynamic DT-770s? And she said, oh, I use these for when I'm in the booth because they look cute. And so she wanted some headphones that looked a certain way. And I did think, I was like, well, let's see. She has dark hair and she's kind of dark complected, and she went with some white headphones. And I thought, well, they really do look good. They were smaller, the cans were. And I thought that's a consideration I had never given for headphones, was how they looked on camera, how they looked when you zoom.
And it's, I think as people do more YouTube stuff and things like that from home, there is something to be said about that. And in those cases, honestly, if you're worried about how you look, I just do earbuds for something where you're like close cameraed and you're not moving a whole lot. And you can really, what you can do also with your earbuds, pro tip, if you're worried about any sort of bleed through from your earbuds and you already have a pair that you like, you can get some Comply tips, and that's the name of the company, is Comply. They have isolating tips, and you literally can put in, they're a third-party manufacturer, so you can put in whatever brand of headphones you have and whatever, and you can get tips that are basically, I have a pair of those earbuds here that is like, let me bring it up to the camera a little
Yeah, let's
closer
check it
so
out.
You can kind of see.
Look at
so
that.
See how it's like a memory foam kind of material?
Yeah.
It's kind of squishy. These are super duper isolating. And in fact, they do a better job of blocking out noise than some noise canceling over your headphones do.
Wow.
So if you get a good seal with something like that, you're not going to have to worry about any bleed through. And then, if it's just the little in-ears, it's kind of much more demure, and you can put your hair over it if you've got, especially, I do know that is an issue, headbanded headphones for people that have sort of large curly hairstyles, like people have really thick curly hair. The headbands can be uncomfortable or have to smash into their hair. That's a good option for someone like that. You might just want to invest in a cable extender, which you can get pretty inexpensively. Monoprice makes them. And then you can have the extra cable and the earbuds. You don't have to worry about trying to fit over your hairstyle.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, because I think what we are both wearing, circumaural, they fit over the entire ear. The flappy outside part of the ear, which, mine is pretty big and Dumbo, that's called the pinna. Mm-hmm. And a circumaural style headphone covers the outside of the ear completely. Now, there is a style, and I've seen these particularly for headsets like telemarketers you'll see where they rest on the ear, which is called supraaural. And I just keep thinking, well, I'm not sure if that really works well for a voice actor, mostly because of sound isolation. And for me personally, for comfort. What do you think?
I would agree with that. I usually shy away from them unless it's someone who has a specific physical reason why they can't work with that. And even then, I'd usually try to aim them towards an earbud style if they can handle it. The only reasons I've had people ever say that they need that on-ear, as you're talking about supraaural, generally when you look at like websites and you're buying it, usually says on-ear. And
sorry, I didn't mean to go Latin on it.
No. I'm just trying. I'm speaking the talk of people. If you're like going on to Amazon and you're like, if you Google circumaural, you'll get audiophile stuff that's going to cost like $2,000, and you're going to be like, what is this crap? Where if you put over ear, you'll find stuff that's in like the under $200 range.
Well, that's a good tip, because I sort of knew the old school traditional term. So we would say over ear, on ear, in ear, right?
In ear. Okay. Or earbuds. Earbuds is also interchangeable for in ear.
Good.
Sometimes you'll get the term monitor, in-ear monitor. And that's usually a good word to use if you're looking for something that does do some decent isolating, because when you hear in-ear monitor, it's often for people that are using stage earbuds. And those work really well for also recording because, again, you're getting the same kind of secure fit that isn't going to get picked up by a microphone because it works on stage, works in your booth.
Right.
But the on-ear, the only reason I would say someone could use those is if you have a very thick glasses style to your eyewear. Thinner ones, usually you can get the foam to seal around anyway, but the really thick ones, like, the designer ones, sometimes you have a hard time with the over-ear style, and the on-ear might seal better for you. But that's really the only use case I can think of that I would say is worth toying around with it. But even then, you really need to make sure that you get them to settle properly there. Look for ones that are not like the old Walkman foam. And I think if you're, of a certain age, you know what I'm talking about, where like Koss still makes some like that. There's a few companies that have that. Look for something that has a thicker, more memory foam style padding that can really smush against your ears. And you might want to go with something that's a little tighter on your head that smashes in a bit, because then it'll seal more closely to your ears and you'll have less likely to have leakage. But again, everyone except for people with very thick glasses or for comfort things. Like if you have I do know some people that have issues that are on, that have like hypersensitivity for touch, that over-ear headphones can oftentimes make them feel uncomfortable. Sometimes people on the autism spectrum have issues with that. Sometimes people who are just have hypersensitivity to touch, that they might find that uncomfortable. But we're talking a very narrow range. Most people, I think, are going to be fine with the over-ear, but just keeping it, Yeah. Because I know there's always exceptions and everyone has needs, that they need to have met.
Yeah. Can you think of a situation where having either an open back or a semi-open would be helpful to a voice actor?
Not really. Only because the microphone's going to pick it up.
Yeah. Well, and that's assuming you hear yourself or that the microphone hears the actor, both of which you would not want to be recorded necessarily, but more yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the only option I could see is if you're someone who specifically doesn't want any microphone, monitoring to happen. So, like, you just want to turn up. But then at that point, why? I mean, you can't wear. Why are you wearing? Other than to hear like maybe talk back from the producer or something.
Sure.
But that would be the only situation, is if you need director notes, but you aren't listening to yourself. You have everything turned down. You're not listening to any sort of cues that are going to be recorded. No musical stuff. No mute beds. No other actors that you're replying to. You're literally just you and a director. Otherwise, you can just not wear headphones.
Yeah.
But in the case of that one specific case. But I feel like at that point, you're also investing so much money into something that you only can use for such a small amount of your business,
Yeah.
One of the things is like a lot of these headphones, if you need to hear, you just flip it. And because the way these ear cups flip, I can now do this if I need a break to hear something that's going on around me. You can still hear me and stuff, and then flip it back on again. With the 371s, that's another thing that's nice about this, is you just turn it out and you can still hear what's going on around you if you need that break.
Yeah. Well, I've seen, sort of an old radio style to take the headset off and just hold cup one. And so for people who have sort of muscle memory, that, they'll hold one cup on one ear and leave the rest of the head open. Then they're not dealing with the hair or anything. That's an option as well. And then I've seen this move.
Yep.
Where all I'm doing is putting it behind my ear. Now I hear my own voice in my booth or my setup or wherever I'm recording. And so, which I think a lot of actors benefit from hearing themselves. I know singers do as well. So sometimes I always give the advice, though, and the reason I like, as a recording engineer, the reason I like this approach is it puts it away from the microphone, but it's still cupped to the head. Whereas when you turn it out, you could get some leakage that way.
Yeah. And
yeah, that works pretty well.
And I think, and I wonder too, this is just me sort of extrapolating. When I first started doing this stuff and I came out of college umpteen years ago, my background is I was a classical singer. That was my scholarship. I got a scholarship for singing a chanson and German lieder. So
nice.
I was not used to being on a microphone at all. I was used to trying to fill a room and hearing everything from the acoustic feedback of the space. And that was how everyone was trained. In the classical world, microphones were not a thing you did. That was you shouldn't need them. And so it was a very strange situation to get myself accustomed to the headphone, whereas now I feel as though more of the world is accustomed to this. And I feel like younger people, especially people that are newer to the industry, this isn't uncomfortable for them. You're used to having headphones on, a microphone in front of you. It's not necessarily as foreign as it was back in, the early days of stuff, or when, you first went into the booth was the first time you heard yourself on a mic and you're like, oh, do I really sound like that? I don't think it's as much of an issue now as it used to be, but I do understand wanting to hear yourself. Although the hope is that the microphone that you have is a good enough representation of you that you should feel like it sounds similar to what you're experiencing.
That's a really interesting idea. I will often tell people with microphones, I like to find a microphone that brings out the qualities in your voice that you and your clients want to hear, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. Maybe it helps tame something, like if you're really sibilant, the microphone is a little smoother and more gentle in the place where your sibilance typically has. I was thinking about how when I am on a microphone and I'm hearing myself while I'm recording, that I both hear myself in my own head because my voice is attached, but then I get feedback into the headphones as well. And I wonder if one of the sort of personal choices that people might make with headphones, they say, well, a lot of people say these headphones are great, but I just, for whatever reason, don't like them. I wonder if part of it is the interaction between the actor's voice, their microphone, and what they hear of themselves through bone induction, and then what they need to sort of fill in the rest of the information. So I would guess that some headphones that maybe were a little bit thin might be okay, because the bone induction is going to be warmer. Mm-hmm. It's not going to have any high frequency information. And that would be different than just a casual or even an expert, high-end audio headphone listener, because you are hearing yourself while you perform. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really unique circumstance for headphones, and maybe some of the reason why people have such strong preferences has to do with hearing themselves while they're listening to themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a little bit too, on my end of things, of having to let go some of the control, because obviously, like, I can choose anything I want in my home setup, but once I get into a studio, what microphone is chosen and what headphones, unless I bring my own, which I have done.
Sure.
And I always have wondered about, on your end, like the etiquette of that. Is that like a jerk move to be like, sorry, I have my own headphones, I just like to plug these in? Or is that like something that you guys are like, oh, okay, that's normal and fine?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, here's my take generally. I want the technology to serve the performance, to serve the art. I hate it when we sort of feel like, well, we have to do it this way because of whatever the circumstance is. Well, the mic's high, so you have to lift your head, but I want to growl. Well, I would rather place the mic somewhere that works for you. I would rather use the headphones that help you be comfortable. I asked a friend of mine, Kelly Ward, who's a voice director, I said, how do you describe your job as a voice director? And he said, I help actors get out of their own head. If you're preoccupied with something that doesn't let you deliver the character or the scene or whatever that moment is, the pivot, because you're preoccupied by the microphone or headphones or, the coffee, I don't care. We need to strip those things away. We need to take away, the technology is really there to capture the performance and let us work. And so I feel like if you bring your headphones into my studio and want to plug them in, we'll adjust the volume so that it doesn't knock you over, because I always worry about, well, this headphone has wildly different impedance than that one, and I don't want anybody to get hurt. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't know, other engineers may feel differently, but I feel like, I remember the first chair violin would always bring in a little plastic over-the-ear piece, and they'd plug it into the box, and we've got 30 people all performing in the studio at the same time, and all the studio headphones are out except that one, and it had a wildly different performance and would just crush the amp. And I'd checked all the headphones. The first chair, it was always first chair violin. I don't know why. They'd come out with their special little headphone, plug it in, and everybody else would lose their headphones. And so we started setting out a separate box just for first chair.
That's crazy. I wonder what's happening there.
Well, it's one amp driving tons of distribution boxes, so it's far from ideal. And the amps were really designed for speakers, for large loudspeakers, not for headphones anyway.
Yeah.
So we were kind of cheating. Rather than having individual amplifiers at every spot, you got 30 people out there. You sort of gang them up. So that, in some ways that was our own fault. But I learned as an assistant, as a person who just answered the phones and helped set the headphones out and check them very early in my career, that people are going to bring their own headphones, and that's okay. To me, it never hurts to ask. Like if you have an idea for this copy says something and you think, it might sound more natural if we say this, and you ask. Same thing with a microphone. If you show up and they've got something that you don't sound good on or doesn't really work for this particular spot, and you say, hey, I brought my own microphone. Do you want to hear how it sounds? I think if you're offering, and same thing with the headphones, it's a little more personal than the mic.
Yeah.
You come in with your headphones, it's a hygienic thing. Like they're for my ears, all of that stuff. I think bringing your own headphone is also, right now, we're all sort of forced to use headphones because we're working from home. But when we go back to working in studios again, if you've invested in something that's nice and gets good isolation and works for you at home, why shouldn't you be comfortable using that in a pro studio too?
And I think it also, too, might also help with that sort of psychological aspect of if you're accustomed to hearing your voice sounding a certain way, it's one less element that's altering it in that path. The microphone's going to alter your voice sound a little bit. The headphones are going to alter your voice sound a little bit. And then, of course, whatever happens in post. But during the recording session, even just knowing your bass line might be something that helps people feel more comfortable just walking in. They know how these fit. They know the weight. They know how the cable moves. Like, there's a lot of weird little things. Like, if I have a zipper on a sweatshirt, it'll rub. And so there's a lot of little things that, like, I've gotten used to with the headphones that I know of how I move so that I don't get cable flapping sounds or creaks or whatever. So if you know your headphones really well and they're broken in really well, it might not, I suppose it might not hurt as long as the engineer's okay with it and you're not, stepping on any toes. That makes me feel better anyway about it. I don't do it too often, but as we move back in after all of this, I might start a little more. I usually wipe stuff down. That's another thing is clean your headphones.
Please.
This is a PSA for the world. Please
Yes.
clean your headphones. Not only is it just good for hygiene, it also makes them last longer because I actually spoke with a microbiologist about why the vinyl breaks down on things.
Yeah.
And he actually was fascinated with the topic, and we talked about dermatology and the biome that lives on your skin and what could break it down and what couldn't. And what he said was, and he's like, this would be fascinating to research if I could get someone to fund it, because my theory is that it's actually not the bacteria and other, basically fauna that lives on your face eating it up. It's their poop breaking it down. And I was like, well, thank you for that. I'm going to clean my headphones all the time now. Thank you.
And wash my face a lot more.
Yeah. But apparently, that's the thing is we have we have things that live on us. They're beneficial. It's lovely, but they eat our skin and our sebum and all that stuff. And that gets on your headphones. And if it sits there for a little while, as they eat up what's left, all the food you leave on there from touching your face, that waste product gradually breaks down the plastics. Anyway.
I can honestly say I'm not hungry right now.
So if that doesn't make people want to wipe down their headphones, I don't know what will, but please do that.
Wipe down your headphones, and if you're using headphones that belong to the studio, be sure you wipe those down. Now, what do you like to wipe them down with?
You know what? Basic soap and water.
Yeah.
That really just get a cloth, a little bit of pump of soap, kind of squeezy. And you can even, if I go into a studio, I'll just ask to use the restroom, get a paper towel out of there, a little soap and water on it, wipey, wipe with a dry one. You're good. That's all you really need to get just the basic oil and stuff off there from the last person. You don't want to go too caustic because sometimes depending on the material, if it's leather or whatever, like some of these headbands are leather, some of them are pleather. You don't want to end up breaking it down by using something that's too intense, like a Lysol or bleach, or even rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol is okay once in a while, but it can dry it out and sometimes cause it to crack, especially if you're in a drier environment. So you just kind of want to be careful of that. But yeah, that's what I'd recommend for cleaning anyway. It's just most basic soap and water. Earbuds you can clean out with a little brush. If you have like earwax in there, you can kind of clean it out. You can buy like a little loop and a little brush. It's good to do once in a while. Some people who have a little higher wax production need to do that once in a while.
Are we going to have to put a disclaimer on the front of this that germaphobes should not listen at all?
I know. Well, I would hope germaphobes already know some of this stuff because they already are thinking about it. But yeah, it's gross. Like there's body stuff. Like that's one of the things about, I think that's been so interesting for me doing this job with headphones is that unlike any other audio product, it is very personal.
Yeah.
It has to fit your body. It has to work with your biology. And so there are things that you have to get into that is, maybe microphones, you have to talk a little bit about the pop filter doubling as a spit protector. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot of biology in monitor speakers and cables and stuff, so. Yeah,
there are very few things in the studio we wear. Headphones are one of them, yeah.
Headphones are the only ones. And it's so personal. And sometimes fit can really be the difference between a great sound and a terrible sound. I mean, if you are getting earbuds that don't have a lot of bass consistently, you might not be wearing the right ear tips. And if you don't get a good seal, over ear, on ear, in ear, same thing. You're going to lose your bass response. And I'll get a lot of people that'll say to me, like, not a lot, but it happens frequently where someone will say to me, like, I don't understand. You say these headphones have great bass. I get nothing. I get absolutely nothing. And I'm like, do me a favor, shift them forward a little and up and then push in. And they're like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, those are too big for your head. You need smaller ones. Because you're losing all the bass out of a gap. And that happens.
Well, and that's fairly important for a voice actor. If they have a gap somewhere in terms of fit, I mean, my father has sold industrial safety equipment. So I know when I see the person on TV and that strap for their mask is on their neck instead of behind their neck, then it's not pulling close here and they don't have proper protection on. Well, it's very similar with headphones. If you're not getting a good seal, not only is it going to sound weird, but you could potentially be getting some leakage into the microphone, and that's an issue for a voice actor.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot of little things like that I think. Oh, and just as another PSA that things people might not always think about. If you do have a pair of headphones that you're taking with you when you go out and about, don't leave them in your car.
Don't do that. If you
leave them in your car, the heat and the cold, whatever climate you live in, extreme heat, extreme cold is going to start breaking stuff down, whether it's the plastics, the adhesives, because a lot of this stuff is just glued together, like the pads glued to different stuff. So take them inside with you,
Well, and the drivers probably don't benefit from that heat either.
Yeah, I mean, really nothing does. I mean, depending on what the drivers are made out of, and planar magnetic ones versus like a paper, cone. But yeah, it's it's just bring them inside. Treat them like a pet. If you love them, bring them inside.
That's good advice. So clean your headphones and don't leave them in the car. Those are both really good advice. I love that. See, these are not things I would normally think to encourage people to think about, and here we are.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you sort of bigger picture. So we've talked about I'm on mic, I'm performing. What do headphones need to do for me in that circumstance? What other things, and you alluded to this near the top where you were talking about editing and listening in general. What other kinds of things do voice actors need from their headphones?
Well, and that's why I'd said about editing and so forth. If you have something that doesn't have, that's too hyped, that isn't too neutral, and I think you talked about headphones being fatiguing, and I wanted to kind of clarify that term because I think sometimes people are like, what does that mean? Like, usually what it means is for some people, and I'm someone who's very sensitive to high frequency sounds, for some reason they just grate on me. And so if something has too much like STP sound, you know, that higher frequencies, or it's also sort of like the hi-hat range, it is distractingly loud. And you'll find, usually what I tell people is, if you'll know you're sensitive to it if you want to turn something up to hear actually like some of the bass drop, and then when some of the cymbal stuff comes in or the consonants come in, you're like, I got to turn this down, it's too loud, it's killing me. That means you might be sensitive to higher frequencies, or the headphones that you have are a little bit sibilant heavy. And for me, I don't like that sound quality. Some people like that because they may see it as enhancing detail. So there is a personal level to that, but that's what fatiguing means. But generally, I find that if something's more neutral sounding, perceptually neutral, Harmon Curve, as we talked about, if you do need to do some basic mixing, because sometimes you will need to make a demo. I've occasionally had to send in stuff where I'm singing over a demo track, and I want to make sure that it blends okay. Sometimes you might get something where you have on the fly, like if you're doing like an indie film with ADR or something, you need to send it back, and you want to make sure that that kind of stuff, you do need to listen in headphones sometimes. It's not ideal, and I know a lot of audio people will get very upset with me if I even recommend using headphones to do any sort of mixing. And so I will add this as an asterisk, like it's really only in like extreme circumstances. Like sometimes you're on the road, it's a rush, you don't have time to get back and plug into your good monitors and listen to it. You just have to do it on headphones. In those circumstances, it is nice to have something that has a better, what we call sound stage, which is the sense of space, a sense of having more dimensions than just a flat 2D sound, and something that has more representation that sounds more accurate to our ears. So something that isn't as pleasant and fun as it might be to have headphones that are bass boosted and like intense, and you know, that's great. Not what you want to be mixing your stuff on, because the reasoning is because when you go out and send it to someone else, they may not have that same sort of baseline, and suddenly you lost all the bass you thought you have. You lost all the richness you thought you had in your voice. You maybe moved your mic to the wrong positioning because you thought you were picking up too much chest voice and you wanted a little more head voice. And suddenly you're losing that because your headphones sounded warmer than what you actually were recording on the microphone. So that's why I think it actually is nice to have something that does have a well-rounded sound if you can manage it and afford it. Especially if you're kind of gradually upgrading your sound studio. So if that hopefully answers your question. Absolutely.
No, I love thinking about all of that stuff because we have a primary purpose as a voice actor for what we want those headphones to do. But I think those other potential uses like editing, mixing, judging whether something matches or not, those are, granted, those are secondary uses. We're not always booking on that, but we make choices based on what we hear. At least I hope so. I also think it's possible, like you and I might have some nice speakers in our homes as folks who care about listening. You might have, a voice actor might have speakers and it might even be connected. But I think for most folks, especially if your setup at home was originally designed as a space to audition, some people have been booking from home. But again, if recording is the primary goal, headphones may be the speakers. That may be what people have. Mm-hmm. And so investing in a little bit better sounding pair of headphones, getting over the $100 mark might benefit you in some other ways. Mm-hmm. I do think it's interesting to think about in-ear earbud style as a way to look nicer on video. Mm-hmm. I think voice actors, I always felt like when it's on camera, people show up and they're going to go to wardrobe and they're going to do makeup and all that stuff. When we're doing voiceover, it's like, all right, sweats, I don't care. Nobody's going to see us, right? But now the client might be on the Zoom call. So maybe we do care about headphones, and I don't want to be dismissive. We sort of make fun of somebody who wears headphones because they're cute, but I think there's a legitimate case there for the impression that you give front to back. So does your situation look professional, including your headphones? Mm-hmm. One other thing, a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, loudspeakers have a fatigue, and I just simply describe it as if I work for an hour straight, are my ears tired? right?
Yep.
That's the simple way that I describe it on speakers. And some speakers, you know, certain brands and models I've had, I like the way they sound. They're very pleasant, but I can't work on them very long or my ears just get tired. I'm exhausted. Others, I feel like as long as they're not, you know, as long as I can trust them, I can work on them much longer. And headphones are the same way. And one of my things that I'm looking for as an audio professional, and maybe actors are too, particularly for longer sessions, is do the headphones turned up, make them loud. You can turn them down. That helps a bit. If you have headphones that sort of, when you're done, you just go, oh, I'm exhausted. And you may not realize, you know, because voice acting can be exhausting too. Maybe your headphones are exacerbating that and making it harder for you to work. So if you found something that you liked, and this gets back to what you were asking about taking your headphones with you into a studio, buying some headphones that you like at home. Another thing that's kind of subtle that not everybody thinks about, but I've done enough work in headphones to realize that some headphones hold heat.
Yeah.
And I have found that if I have leather or pleather against my face, that it doesn't hold heat the same way that something really fuzzy does. And so a little bit like a blanket, so DT-770s might be a great example. I love the way those things sound, but when I wear them, my head just gets hot.
Yeah.
And I think any headphone that I wear, if I'm getting a good seal, the possibility of trapping heat is always there. But that's something that, you know, it's not a primary concern, but if you're really looking for a great set of headphones, if you're getting hot and sweating, and again, if we're working from home and you're on a video call, maybe sweat pouring down your face is an issue. Maybe you don't want to look like somebody who, although maybe you do. Maybe you want to, like, I'm giving my all, director.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could add to your commitment level of,
That's right.
But no, but you're absolutely right. And actually, it's interesting you're saying that because that's something gamers deal with a lot. People who do a lot of gaming need headphones that breathe really well. And they're people that are also on microphone and on camera a lot. They oftentimes are broadcasting via Twitch, and they're doing a lot of work that is essentially like voiceover, but for they're narrating their games. And, you know, professional gamers deal with that all the time. And you know, something that it's a kind of a trade-off because some people do like those on-ear style because they can have more airflow around their ear. But at the same time, you're also going to have that tighter clamping force. And that's something you need to think about too when you're picking your headphones is, can you wear these for a long time? If it's squeezing and you feel it after half an hour and you're kind of like needing to kind of stretch and you want to take them off because you just feel like you're either claustrophobic or just pinching or squeezing too much, those are not going to last you through a full session, especially if you're doing something that's really time intensive. You know, commercial session, maybe. But, you know, if you're in there and you're recording some serious animation or something or a book, you better make sure those things fit you comfortably and that you can handle them. And I think that's something that's worth, you know, thinking about when you're trying them out. And what I personally recommend to people is, you know, a lot of places now have really generous return policies. Amazon and Best Buy, places like that, where keep the packaging. Hang on to it for a couple of days. Keep your receipt, keep your packaging. Take them out very carefully. Don't rip it open, as exciting as it is to unbox and be like, my new thing. Take it out carefully. Try them out for a bit. And if they are uncomfortable for you, they don't work for your body, something feels weird, put them back and send them back, you know, because you don't want to commit to something just because you read it was great somewhere else and it doesn't work for your body and your need set. You have to do what's right for you and not necessarily what's trendy or interesting to someone else. Because that's really the bottom line of all of this. I always kind of liken it to jeans. Like, we like to think that there's a sisterhood of traveling pants size headphone that fits everybody and makes everybody sound fabulous and feel fantastic, but it's very rare. And I can only maybe get 80% of the people. And for that other 20%, you need to find whatever's going to fit your body and your needs.
Well, that's a great point. As we sort of wind this up, I could do this all night, but let's see if we could wind up here. A couple of things. What if someone has some noise canceling headphones that they wear and they like? Should they use those in the booth? Are they appropriate for a voice actor?
I don't love them. And there's two reasons why. the vast majority of noise canceling headphones, the sound is altered when you turn the noise canceling on versus off. The tuning, that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it changes. But generally speaking, the noise canceling, because of the way the phase cancellation is working inside of the ear cups, it is far more likely that you're going to get a deader sound. Also, you're not going to be able to hear if you're picking up a hum somewhere. Like if you've got a fan running, you could be recording, your headphones aren't picking it up. And I've had that happen to me where I have just sort of gotten accustomed to a sound even, like not just even from noise canceling, but like a pipe sound in a hotel. And I'll go back and re-listen to my recording and I'll hear it turn off and then turn on again because I tried to punch something in and I'm like, dang it. Now I need to match that pipe sound or I need to re-record everything when it's quiet. So you just sort of, that's my main reason why not. That said, like if it's all you have and you need them for some other reason and your budget can allow for it, I don't hate them. There are definitely some noise canceling headphones that sound better than others, generally speaking. But I would say use them in passive mode in that case when you're recording. Just use a cable. Don't do Bluetooth. Don't turn the noise canceling on. Just use them straight ahead. Like the PSB M4U 2s, for example, are really decent sounding headphones, have nice room sound, but I would leave that off, leave the noise canceling off.
Well, and you mentioned Bluetooth. What about wireless headphones for voice actors?
I mean, look, you can use them for, Zoom call kind of stuff, but if you're recording and you're monitoring your recording, you're going to get a delay no matter what, no matter how fast it is. And it's just a small bit, but that little bit of delay could mess with your thoughts and it can be very distracting. And it has less to do with actually the headphones and the Bluetooth itself, but the processing of the sound inside the computer and sending it back to you. And that can get really irritating. So I would not recommend using Bluetooth. Like always go corded until one day we get really fast computers and then we'll do that. But for now, where the technology stands today, it's verboten.
Well, I certainly would not recommend noise canceling or wireless as a first choice to purchase. But it's interesting to think about, might we use those if we already have them? I think purpose-built with a cable is my preference too. But it's interesting to think about, what are the different aspects of what people have and what they want to use. I'm wondering, do you think there's anything, just to round out the questions here, are there any misguided ideas that people have generally or specifically that voice actors might have about headphones? Should we dispel any myths while we're here?
Let's think. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that expensive always is better. That is not the case. In fact, I know plenty of headphones that cost an awful lot of money that sound terrible. And I've reviewed a lot of them. So don't get caught up in just that feeling of that you have to spend a lot of money in order to be effective at what you're doing. Because at the end of the day, you and your performance are what's important, not the label that's on the side of your headphones. Unless the label makes you feel better and makes you feel confident and good, throw all that out the window. The other thing I would say, I remember you talking about impedance and things like that. High impedance headphones aren't really as much of a thing as they used to be. There's still a handful of companies that make them. Beyerdynamic is one of them. But generally speaking, you aren't going to need to worry about that so much. Most things now can be driven pretty effectively by a laptop or something like that. You don't necessarily need to have a separate amp to do all of that stuff. They're fine. You can have them, and that's lovely. And especially on some headphones that are, more expensive, that have a little bit trickier drivers, like planar magnetic stuff, you can get into that world. But one of the things I find is people get into this audio world, and there's a lot of people who want to sell you a lot of things that you don't need. So don't get caught up in it. Don't get worried about oxygen-free cables with gold-plated, voodoo-chanted, magic unicorn elixir parts of them, because there are things. I literally got an email the other day about $150 cable risers.
Right.
Risers each. Right. And you're supposed to lay them on the ground to keep the magnetic fields away from your cable. Just don't let your cables touch each other. Ground your equipment. Don't be all freaking out. So just go in knowing that generally speaking, if it sounds like it's okay when you're using it, it's probably okay. Use your instincts, use your ears. So don't let people sell you stuff. The other thing is, I think it's completely valid to want to be able to hear yourself. But I do think it's important to make sure that you're not picking up stuff from your headphones and to try that out, because there's that sort of sense of, you're right. There's that "we are the world" image of like you're holding your headphone and you're getting in there. Yeah. But that also affects your body mechanics, because now I'm changing how my voice is moving. So really, you want to, and I'm totally not against doing this. When you buy your headphones, move around, look like a weirdo, because you will be getting told direction of, okay, now this take, you're getting shot and then lit on fire. Yeah. Okay, and go ahead whenever you're ready. And you're like, how do I do that standing still? So you want to be able to move and do things and not be thinking about this. Yeah. So that's another thing is, oftentimes people think they need these big honking things that look amazing because I'm a pro, and it gets in your way. Don't let it get in your way. You don't need the technological bells and whistles for this. Look, I love true wireless headphones. I love noise canceling headphones. I love all the little fun, fancy things that you can do now. But in the booth, you want simple. You want something that's going to do the job consistently, and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to charge it. You don't have to worry about any of that. So don't, worry about that kind of stuff when it goes into recording. And, the other thing I would say is spend some time with it. Listen to stuff that you know musically before you go into the booth and record them, so that you have kind of gotten a sense of them. People talk about burn-in time. Uh-huh. That's a fun thing. That's a myth, actually. You can measure them after about the first half hour to 15 minutes or so. Anything that's going to shake loose in those drivers is moved, and there's very little change in the sound quality. What's really happening during burn-in time is you're getting accustomed to that sound profile. So when you know your headphones, when you know your microphone, when you know how it's supposed to sound, because you've used it practicing, you've used it for auditions, you've used them for listening to some music, kind of, they kind of have a little extra S sound, so it's okay if it's not going to be a big deal in the recording if it picks it up a little bit more. Or, it's a little more sensitive and I'm not hearing myself, I must really not be picking that up. I need to make sure that I'm turning my gain up, or I'm a little closer, or whatever you need to do. When you know your equipment well, you can record better. So that's the other thing, is it's not just about the best stuff. It's about being sort of really well acquainted with your stuff, whatever that stuff may be.
Yeah, well, headphones. I mean, I like these if for no other reason than they're familiar to me. So I imagine the 7506s feel very familiar to you.
And that's the thing. And that's the other reason, is everyone's got preferences. Everyone's got a thing that they like or don't like. For me, the Shures were a little harsh on the high end. But that's my personal thing. I know some people that swear up and down by the Technica ATH-M50x's. I find those have a really piercing high end that to me gets to be too much. Some people might say that the K371s that are the audio darlings sound like way too much bass for them, and they're just like, holy cow, So you need to know what works for you and feels good to you, and there isn't really a wrong answer. It's just make sure you know what that does down the line. You make sure you know what you're hearing, how it affects what you're putting out. And as long as you're familiar with that, you can adjust accordingly. I think the biggest problem is when people use something assuming that what they're hearing makes them sound that way to everyone. So you have to remember that what you're recording may sound different to someone using different equipment. And so that's why it's best to kind of try to find that normal. But, I could go into a lot of other things about that. But yes, you have to find what works for you is really what it comes down to. And you can read a lot of reviews and stuff, but, at the end of the day, it has to feel good to you.
Well, Lauren, this has been great. I've so enjoyed this. It's so great to hear the perspective of a voice actor to talk about what we want and love out of headphones, and to hear someone who is an expert in headphones to talk about what voice actors need from their headphones. And so from both sides to put that together with you, thank you so much. If people want to hear your voice some more, like say, for example, your demo, or they want to contact you for something, or they want to read more of your headphone reviews and expertise, where should people go?
Okay. I am very findable on the internet. So my name is Lauren Dragan with an A-N, not an O-N. So Lauren Dragan at Twitter, Lauren L. Dragan at Instagram, Facebook. You want to contact me, that's a great way. Wirecutter, wirecutter.com. Also, I do a lot of stuff in the New York Times, so you can go through them because they own us as well. So I'm very findable. And I'm represented by Vox. So if you want to do voiceover stuff, you can contact them and Go Voices in the Midwest. But generally speaking, if you need to reach me, find me somewhere on social media, just ping me, DM me, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions you have about gear. Or if you want to have me record something for you, then I'm more than happy to pass you along to whoever it is that needs to represent me.
Well, this has been so great. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. And I hope that the rest of the voiceover community benefits from this conversation. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thanks for having me. It was fun.